I hope you're ready to spend the night in jail, you criminal. Karen's shrill voice shattered the peaceful evening like a hammer through glass, her accusatory finger trembling with self-righteous fury as she jabbed it toward my chest. I stood frozen in my doorway, still clutching the carefully arranged charcuterie board I'd spent an hour perfecting for my daughter's college graduation celebration, my mind struggling to process this surreal interruption to what should have been the proudest moment of my life as a mother. The gentle notes of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue drifted mockingly from my backyard speakers, a jarring counterpoint to the tension crackling in the air between us. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of justice served, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. The past few months had been a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. After losing my husband Robert to a sudden heart attack during Emma's freshman year, every milestone in her life had taken on an even deeper significance. I'd thrown myself into planning this graduation celebration with an almost obsessive attention to detail, perhaps trying to compensate for the empty chair that would be at our table, the proud father's smile that would be missing from our photos. I'd known Karen Henderson for 15 years, watched her transform from a merely nosy neighbor into something approaching a suburban conspiracy theorist. Her evolution had been gradual but unmistakable. It started with small things: complaining about children riding bikes on the sidewalk, reporting improperly placed trash bins to the homeowners association, photographing cars that parked too close to her pristine lawn. But this was an entirely new level of unhinged behavior, even for her. The string of fairy lights I'd meticulously arranged across my backyard that morning cast a soft, golden glow behind me, illuminating the faces of 20 stunned guests who had fallen into an uncomfortable silence at the commotion. Among them, I could see Emma's friends from college, their expressions a mix of confusion and secondhand embarrassment, and my elderly parents, who had flown in from Arizona specifically for this celebration. My father, still striking in his military bearing despite his 80 years, looked ready to intervene, but my mother's gentle hand on his arm held him back. The charcuterie board trembled slightly in my hands as I fought to maintain my composure. 15 years of dealing with Karen's escalating episodes of neighborhood surveillance had taught me that showing any sign of weakness would only encourage her further. I carefully set down the board on the entry table, buying myself a moment to steady my breathing and gather my thoughts. "Karen," I began, keeping my voice level despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "This is Emma's graduation party. You remember Emma, don't you? The little girl who used to bring you cookies every Christmas? The one you gave extra candy to every Halloween because she was just so polite?" I gestured toward my daughter, who had appeared at my shoulder, her graduation cap still perched atop her carefully styled dark curls, the gold tassel catching the light as she shifted uncertainly beside me. Emma had always been the peacemaker, just like her father. Even now, I could see her mind working, trying to find a diplomatic solution to this ridiculous situation. She'd inherited Robert's calm demeanor and my determination, a combination that had served her well throughout her academic career and her environmental advocacy work. But today, on what should have been her moment of triumph, I could see the hurt in her eyes, the slight trembling of her lower lip that she was trying so hard to control. Karen's face, already flushed with righteous indignation, turned an even deeper shade of red. Her perfectly maintained bob haircut seemed to bristle with static electricity, matching her agitated state. "Oh, don't you dare try to manipulate me with those memories," she spat, her French manicured fingers white-knuckled around her iPhone 15 Pro Max. The latest model, of course. "I know exactly what's really going on here, Sarah Mitchell. You think you're so clever, disguising your illegal gambling operation as a family celebration." I blinked, momentarily stunned by the sheer absurdity of her accusation. Behind me, I heard someone choke on their drink, followed by a hastily stifled laugh. Karen's eyes darted past my shoulder, scanning the gathering like a prison searchlight seeking escapees. The scene behind me was hardly the picture of a criminal enterprise. My mother was adjusting the flowers on the buffet table. My brother Michael was helping Emma's former roommate Sophia with her camera settings, and Professor Richards was deep in conversation with Emma's godfather David about the latest environmental policy reforms. "I've been watching," Karen continued, her voice rising to a pitch that probably had dogs in the next county covering their ears. "People arriving with suspicious packages, hushed conversations about pot, money changing hands." She wielded her phone like a weapon, her thumb already dancing across the screen as she dialed 911. "I've documented everything." The laughter that escaped my lips was entirely involuntary, but it seemed to act like gasoline on the fire of Karen's conviction. The suspicious packages were, of course, graduation gifts wrapped in cheerful paper, and the pot was undoubtedly a reference to the potluck contributions I'd asked guests to bring. The money-changing hands had been my father reimbursing my brother for the shared Uber ride from the airport. Emma's hand slipped into mine, squeezing gently. "Mom," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of disappointment that no 22-year-old should have to bear on what should be their moment of triumph. "What's happening?" The concern in her voice made my heart ache. This was supposed to be her day of celebration, the culmination of 4 years of relentless hard work, sleepless nights, and determined persistence. She had graduated summa cum laude from State University, with a double major in environmental science and public policy, already accepted into a prestigious graduate program at Stanford. I squeezed Emma's hand back, feeling a surge of protective anger that nearly overwhelmed my usual policy of careful diplomacy with Karen. I had spent months planning this party, wanting everything to be perfect for my daughter. The fairy lights had taken 3 hours to arrange just right, reminding me of the Christmas decorations Robert used to put up, always insisting on checking every bulb before hanging them. The playlist had been carefully curated to include all of Emma's favorite jazz pieces, a love of music she'd inherited from her father. Even the weather had cooperated, providing a perfect early summer evening with just enough breeze to keep everyone comfortable. "The police are on their way," Karen announced with the smug satisfaction of a small child tattling to a teacher. She planted herself firmly on my freshly mowed lawn, her expensive tennis shoes crushing the border petunias I'd planted just last weekend. "And I'm not moving from this spot until they arrive. Someone needs to expose what's really going on in this neighborhood." Looking at those crushed petunias, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Robert had always been the gardener in our family, teaching Emma about different flowers and their care from the time she could walk. After he passed, I'd taken up gardening as a way to feel closer to him, learning through trial and error, my mistakes becoming lessons in patience and persistence. Those petunias had been my first successful attempt at growing something from seed, and watching Karen deliberately trample them stirred something deep inside me. I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder and turned to see my mother, her eyes twinkling with mischief despite her obvious concern. She leaned in close, her voice pitched low. "Honey, should I put away the pot of beef bourguignon? We wouldn't want to be caught with such incriminating evidence." Her attempt at humor, delivered in her slight southern drawl, helped ease some of the tension knotting my shoulders. The beef bourguignon had been Robert's favorite dish, one my mother had taught me to make when Emma was small. Over the years, it had become our family's comfort food, the meal we turned to in times of celebration and sorrow alike. After Robert's funeral, our neighbors had brought casseroles and pies, but it was my mother's beef bourguignon that had finally tempted Emma to eat again. "Actually," I replied, matching her whispered tone, but projecting just loud enough for Karen to hear. "Why don't you serve up another round? Might as well give our guests something to enjoy while we wait for our special visitors." Turning back to Karen, I added in a clearer voice, "Would you like some of the suspicious pot while you wait, Karen? It's my mother's award-winning recipe. She even brought copies to share, though I suppose that could be considered distribution of illicit materials in your current mindset." Karen's only response was to tap her foot impatiently and refresh her phone screen every few seconds, presumably tracking the police's arrival on some app. The party guests had begun to murmur among themselves, creating a low buzz of conversation that mixed with the jazz still playing softly in the background. I could hear snippets of their discussions, equal parts amused and concerned. Professor Richards, a tall, distinguished woman with salt and pepper hair, who had been Emma's mentor throughout college, was explaining something about the historical precedent of moral panic in suburban communities to a group of fascinated listeners. She had driven 3 hours to be here today, bringing with her a letter of recommendation for Emma's Stanford application that had made my daughter cry happy tears when she read it. Emma's college roommate, Sophia, was quietly filming the entire scene on her phone, probably already composing the perfect TikTok caption in her head. She and Emma had become inseparable over their 4 years together, supporting each other through late-night study sessions, heartbreaks, and the shared grief when both lost grandparents during their junior year. Now, Sophia's dark eyes flashed with protective anger as she watched Karen's continuing performance. My brother Michael, ever the peacekeeper, was trying to engage Karen in conversation about her prize-winning roses, but she remained steadfastly committed to her self-appointed stakeout position. Michael had been our rock after Robert's death, stepping in to help with everything from college visits to home repairs. He caught my eye now and gave me a slight wink, his way of letting me know he had my back, just as he always had. The whole situation would have been almost comical if it weren't for the genuine hurt I could feel radiating from Emma. She had always been sensitive to conflict, a trait that made her excellent at environmental advocacy, but less equipped to handle confrontation. I watched as she slipped away from my side to join a group of her friends, who immediately surrounded her in a protective circle of support. Among them was Jason, her study partner from environmental law, who had recently started showing up at our house more frequently than strictly necessary for academic purposes. I noticed how he positioned himself slightly in front of Emma, his broad shoulders creating a barrier between her and Karen's continuing tirade. The protective gesture reminded me so much of Robert that it made my heart catch in my throat. 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to my house with their lights flashing, but sirens mercifully silent. Karen practically sprinted across my lawn, crushing more of my flowers in the process, to meet them, her arms windmilling as she gestured toward my backyard. I couldn't help but notice that one of the arriving officers was James Rodriguez, who had coached Emma's middle school soccer team, and whose daughter had been in several of Emma's high school classes. The memory of those soccer days flooded back suddenly, Robert cheering from the sidelines, Emma's determined face as she practiced penalty kicks, Officer Rodriguez's patient encouragement when she struggled with her confidence. It seemed fitting somehow that he would be here today, another piece of Emma's journey coming full circle. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of his cruiser with an expression that suggested he was trying very hard not to smile. His partner, a younger officer I didn't recognize, emerged from the passenger side, taking in the scene with professional neutrality. The graduation decorations, the "Congratulations, Emma" banner hanging from the garage, the cluster of well-dressed guests still holding plates of food, and the absolutely incongruous sight of Karen Henderson having what appeared to be a meltdown on my front lawn. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Officer Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying a note of barely contained amusement. "Is everything all right here?" His familiar presence seemed to deflate some of the tension in the air, like a pressure valve being released. "Hi, James," I replied, waving with what I hoped was casual nonchalance. "We're celebrating Emma's graduation. Would you and your partner like some cake? She graduated summa cum laude from state." I gestured toward the dessert table, where my mother's triple-layer chocolate cake, another family tradition, stood proudly among an array of other sweets. "Emma graduated? That's wonderful." Officer Rodriguez's face broke into a genuine smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Tell her congratulations from Maria. They were in AP chemistry together, right?" He turned to Karen, his expression shifting to one of professional patience. "Ma'am, are you telling me you called 911 to report a graduation party?" In that moment, I saw something flicker across Karen's face, a brief flash of uncertainty that cracked her righteous facade. It reminded me of another moment years ago, when she had shown a different side of herself. It was right after Robert's funeral, and she had quietly left a pot of tea and a card on our doorstep. The card had simply read, "I'm sorry for your loss." It was perhaps the only time I'd seen genuine empathy from her, a glimpse of the person she might have been before fear and suspicion had hardened her heart. What followed was perhaps the most satisfying 10 minutes of my 15 years, living next door to Karen Henderson. As Officer Rodriguez patiently explained the difference between a family celebration and an illegal gambling ring, Karen's face cycled through an impressive range of colors that would have made a chameleon jealous. Her righteous indignation deflated with each gentle but firm correction of her wild assumptions. "So let me make sure I understand correctly," Officer Rodriguez said, maintaining an admirably straight face. "You saw people arriving with wrapped packages at a graduation party?" He glanced meaningfully at the pile of gifts on a table near the garage. "And you heard something about a pot at a potluck dinner?" His eyes drifted to the buffet table laden with casseroles and slow cookers. "And you witnessed money changing hands between family members sharing travel expenses?" Karen's perfectly manicured fingers fidgeted with the hem of her designer blouse, her certainty visibly crumbling. The younger officer beside Rodriguez was biting his lip, clearly struggling to maintain his professional composure. The situation reached its perfect culmination when Emma's godfather, David Chun, stepped forward from the gathering. David, who happened to be the district attorney for our county, had been quietly observing the scene while enjoying a plate of my mother's infamous pot of beef bourguignon. He cut an imposing figure in his casual weekend attire, somehow managing to project authority even in khakis and a polo shirt. "Officer Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his position despite his casual tone, "I want to commend you and your partner on your professional handling of this situation. It's refreshing to see such measured response to a—" He paused, adjusting his glasses with deliberate slowness, "potentially volatile situation." His words were carefully chosen, the kind of diplomatic language he'd perfected over decades in public service. Karen's expression at that moment was something I wish I could have captured for posterity. Her eyes darted between David's face and the small lapel pin he wore, a gift from the governor for his work on criminal justice reform, as the full implications of her actions began to dawn on her. The realization that she had just called the police to report a supposed crime being committed at a party attended by the district attorney seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Without another word, she turned and fled across the lawn, leaving a trail of crushed petunias in her wake. The silence that followed her departure lasted only a moment before being broken by a collective exhale of relief, followed by scattered laughter and the gradual resumption of conversation. Emma emerged from her protective circle of friends, approaching Officer Rodriguez with a warm smile. "Thanks, Coach," she said softly, using the title she hadn't called him by in years. "Would you really like some cake? Mom ordered it from that bakery you used to take Maria to after our games." As I watched them chat, catching up on years of neighborhood news and shared memories, I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Relief, certainly, and a measure of satisfaction at Karen's comeuppance. But there was something else too. A strange sort of sadness for the kind of person who could look at a joyful family celebration and see only suspicion and wrongdoing. But the real victory that evening wasn't in Karen's humiliation, satisfying as it may have been in the moment. It was in what happened after she retreated to her house, leaving our celebration to continue in peace. The community present that night, a mix of family, friends, professors, and neighbors, drew closer together, united by the shared experience and the absurdity of it all. The incident became a catalyst for stories and laughter, breaking down the formal barriers that often exist at such gatherings. Professor Richard shared tales of Emma's undergraduate adventures that I'd never heard before. Sophia pulled up photos on her phone from their freshman year, leading to both laughter and groans. Even David set aside his usual reserve to tell the story of how he'd first met Robert at law school, and how they decided right then that he would be Emma's godfather. The story of the illegal graduation gambling ring quickly became neighborhood legend, retold with increasing embellishments at block parties and BBQs. Each retelling added new layers of absurdity, though the truth was entertaining enough on its own. What made it truly special was how it transformed our community's dynamics in unexpected ways. Even Karen's husband, Tom, who had long since learned to stay out of his wife's crusades, finally found the courage to speak up. A quiet man who spent most of his time tending to his garden, Tom had always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's vigilante approach to neighborhood watch. The week after the graduation party incident, he approached me while I was replanting my crushed petunias. "Sarah," he said, nervously adjusting his gardening hat, "I want to apologize for what happened. Karen, she means well, but sometimes her anxiety gets the better of her. Ever since her sister was involved in that investment scam last year, she's been seeing threats everywhere." His confession helped me understand Karen's behavior in a new light, though it didn't excuse it. Together, Tom and I convinced Karen to join our monthly neighborhood council meetings. The process wasn't smooth. Karen initially sat in stony silence, arms crossed at the back of the room. But gradually, as she witnessed how actual community problems were addressed through cooperation rather than confrontation, something began to change. It started small. She volunteered to organize the Neighborhood Watch program, legitimately this time. Her attention to detail and tireless energy, once directed at policing her neighbors, became assets in coordinating emergency preparedness plans and safety workshops. She even partnered with Officer Rodriguez to create a youth mentorship program, connecting local kids with positive role models in law enforcement. Emma's graduation party continued well into the night, the initial tension dissolving into warmth and celebration. The jazz playlist cycled through again and again, the fairy lights twinkled overhead, and stories were shared about Emma's journey through college. Several guests even created an impromptu betting pool about how long it would take Karen to apologize, thereby technically fulfilling her gambling ring prophecy. As my brother Michael gleefully pointed out, Jason, Emma's study partner, proved particularly adept at keeping the mood light, sharing stories about their late-night study sessions and environmental activism adventures. As I watched him make Emma laugh, I saw echoes of Robert's warmth in his gentle attentiveness. Later that evening, I overheard him asking her about Stanford and making plans to visit since his new job with an environmental law firm would be taking him to San Francisco regularly. The next morning, as I cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, I found myself reflecting on the strange paths that lead us to growth and change. Karen's accusations, while initially infuriating, had inadvertently created a moment of community bonding that might never have happened otherwise. It reminded me of something Robert used to say: "Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best in people. You just have to wait long enough to see it." Taking his wisdom to heart, I carefully packed a generous portion of my mother's beef bourguignon into one of my best containers. I wrote a note to accompany it. "From your felonious neighbor. No gambling required. Though I should warn you, this pot is highly addictive. Join us for the neighborhood council meeting next Tuesday." As I walked across the lawn to deliver my peace offering, carefully stepping around the newly planted petunias, I noticed Karen watching from her window. When our eyes met, she didn't immediately duck away as she normally would. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she opened her front door. "Sarah," she began, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "about last night, I may have jumped to some conclusions." She twisted her hands together, a gesture so humanizing it caught me off guard. "Tom told me about the conversation you had, about my sister and the investment scam. It's not an excuse, but would you like to come in?" I interrupted gently, holding up the container. "I brought you some of the evidence from last night's criminal enterprise." A slight smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, perhaps the first genuine one I'd seen from her in years. That's how my daughter's graduation party became not just a celebration of her achievements, but the catalyst for an unexpected neighborhood transformation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation or anger, but simply living well and extending an olive branch, or in this case, a pot of beef bourguignon, when it's least expected. Emma went off to Stanford that fall, carrying with her not just memories of academic triumph, but also the story of how her graduation party became an unlikely lesson in community healing. She often jokes that she should include it in her thesis on environmental conflict resolution, though I suspect she's only half kidding. Jason did make those visits to San Francisco, and 2 years later, they celebrated their engagement in our backyard, with Karen volunteering to help organize the party. As for Karen and me, we're not best friends, but we've reached a kind of understanding that feels more authentic than forced politeness. She still watches the neighborhood like a hawk, but now she channels that energy into organizing community events and maintaining our neighborhood's emergency preparedness program. Her attention to detail, once used to document perceived infractions, now goes into creating detailed evacuation plans and maintaining our community's emergency supply cache. The story of the Great Graduation Gambling Bust, as it's come to be known, has become part of our neighborhood's folklore. Every year on its anniversary we have a block party where everyone brings their best potluck dishes and places friendly wagers on whose will win the coveted Most Suspicious Dish award. Karen herself won last year with a mysteriously delicious contraband casserole that had everyone demanding the recipe. The petunias I replanted after that night flourished beyond expectation, spreading and multiplying until they created a stunning border between our properties. Karen and I now share gardening tips over the blooms, our conversations punctuated by the sounds of neighborhood children playing freely on both our lawns. Tom jokes that he never thought he'd see the day when his wife would willingly share her prize-winning rose cultivation secrets. But here we are. Life in our little suburban community continues, marked by the usual dramas and celebrations that make up the tapestry of neighborhood living. But now there's a different flavor to our interactions, a shared understanding that sometimes the best stories and the best relationships come from our most challenging moments. Officer Rodriguez still stops by occasionally, not for complaints, but for my mother's beef bourguignon recipe, which has become a staple at police department potlucks. Looking back, I realized that what could have been just another neighborhood conflict instead became a turning point for our community. It taught us that sometimes the most meaningful changes come from the most unexpected moments, and that there's often more to people's stories than what we see on the surface. Karen's transformation from self-appointed neighborhood vigilante to community organizer showed us all that it's never too late to change, to grow, to find a better way to belong. The graduation photos from that night captured more than just Emma's academic achievement. They documented the beginning of a transformation in our neighborhood's social fabric. In one particularly memorable shot, you can see Karen in the background through our kitchen window, her face a perfect picture of indignant certainty. That photo now hangs in our community center, a reminder of how far we've come, and how sometimes the best celebrations are the ones that don't go quite as planned. Robert would have loved how it all turned out. He always believed in the power of food and laughter to bring people together, to bridge the gaps between neighbors and turn strangers into friends. As I watch Karen teaching newcomers to the neighborhood about our emergency preparedness procedures, or see her organizing our annual Suspicious Potluck Festival, I can almost hear him saying, "See? Sometimes the best communities are built on the foundation of spectacular misunderstandings." And those petunias? They grew back stronger than ever, much like the bonds between neighbors who learned that sometimes the best way to handle conflict is with a dash of humor, a sprinkle of patience, and a generous helping of good food shared among friends. They serve as a living reminder that beauty can flourish in the most unexpected places, even in the aftermath of life's more awkward moments. In the end, what started as a confrontation over an imagined criminal enterprise became the catalyst for real, lasting change in our community. It reminded us all that sometimes the most powerful response to suspicion and fear is not retaliation or resentment, but rather the simple act of extending grace, and maybe sharing a really good recipe for beef bourguignon. The years following that memorable graduation party brought changes that none of us could have predicted. Emma's success at Stanford led her to become a leading voice in environmental law, specializing in community-based solutions to climate change. She often credits that night with showing her how even the most entrenched conflicts can be resolved through patience, understanding, and a willingness to see beyond surface appearances. The relationship between Jason and Emma blossomed in ways that reminded me of my early days with Robert. Their wedding, held in our backyard 3 years after the infamous party, became another testament to how far our neighborhood had come. Karen not only helped with the planning, but insisted on handling the security arrangements herself, this time to keep gatecrashers out rather than to monitor for illegal activities. She even convinced her sister, whose investment scam experience had triggered so much of Karen's paranoid behavior, to help cater the event. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Our monthly neighborhood council meetings evolved into something more than just administrative gatherings. They became a forum for genuine community building, where concerns could be aired openly and solutions found collectively. Karen's organizational skills proved invaluable in establishing a neighborhood emergency response team, complete with regular training sessions and drills. Her attention to detail, once used to document perceived infractions, now went into creating comprehensive emergency protocols that other communities began to emulate. The most suspicious dish competition at our annual block party grew into a highly anticipated event, complete with tongue-in-cheek categories like most likely to be contraband and best criminal conspiracy casserole. Local businesses got in on the joke, donating prizes and participating in the festivities. Even the police department sent representatives, not to investigate, but to judge the competition and share in the laughter. Tom's Garden, once his solitary retreat from Karen's vigilante activities, became a community gathering space. He started a neighborhood gardening club that brought together residents of all ages to learn about cultivation and share in the harvest. The petunias that Karen had trampled that graduation night multiplied and spread, creating a stunning display that became a symbol of resilience and renewal. Visitors to our neighborhood often commented on the unusual sight of garden borders that seemed to flow seamlessly from one yard to the next, ignoring property lines in favor of aesthetic harmony. Professor Richards, who had witnessed the graduation party drama firsthand, incorporated the incident into her sociology lectures as a case study in community conflict resolution. She often invited Karen to speak to her classes about the transformation from suspicion to cooperation, and how sometimes the most powerful catalyst for change can be the recognition of our own mistakes. Officer Rodriguez's involvement in our community deepened as well. The youth mentorship program he developed with Karen's help became a model for other precincts, showing how law enforcement and community members could work together to build trust and understanding. The program particularly focused on helping young people channel their energy and attention to detail into positive community service, rather than suspicious surveillance of their neighbors. The story of our neighborhood's transformation spread beyond our immediate community. Local news outlets picked up the story, featuring it as an example of how confrontation could lead to cooperation, and how misconceptions could be turned into opportunities for growth. Karen, once mortified by her actions, learned to tell the story with self-deprecating humor, using it as a teaching tool in her role as Community Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. My mother's beef bourguignon recipe became something of a legend in its own right. What started as a family comfort food evolved into a symbol of reconciliation and community healing. We even included it in a neighborhood cookbook titled From Suspicious Pots to Community Plots, Recipes that Build Bridges. The proceeds from the cookbook sales went to fund a scholarship for local students interested in community development and conflict resolution. David, Emma's godfather, often remarked that our neighborhood story provided more insight into community justice than many of the cases he encountered in his role as district attorney. He began incorporating elements of our approach into his office's community outreach programs, emphasizing the importance of understanding the underlying causes of suspicious behavior rather than jumping to conclusions. Sophia's TikTok video of the graduation party confrontation, which she had wisely chosen not to post that night, became a teaching tool in our community workshops. With Karen's permission, we used it to demonstrate how quickly assumptions can escalate and how important it is to step back and consider alternative explanations before acting on our fears. The ripple effects of that night continued to surface in unexpected ways. Emma and Jason's environmental law practice in San Francisco specialized in helping communities find collaborative solutions to local disputes. They often cited the graduation party incident as the inspiration for their approach to conflict resolution. Their firm became known for turning adversaries into allies, much like what had happened in our own neighborhood. My relationship with Karen deepened in ways I never expected. We discovered a shared love of mystery novels, which led to the formation of a neighborhood book club. The irony of discussing fictional crimes with someone who had once accused me of running a gambling ring wasn't lost on anyone. Our monthly meetings became a space for honest conversations about prejudice, fear, and the importance of looking beyond first impressions. The transformation in our community attracted attention from urban planners and sociologists studying neighborhood dynamics. Graduate students would visit to conduct interviews and observe our monthly council meetings. Karen, who had once been so suspicious of outsiders, became their most enthusiastic tour guide, proudly showing off our emergency preparedness systems and community gardens. Tom's Gardening Club expanded to include a community composting program and a seasonal farmers market. The market became a gathering place where residents could not only exchange produce, but also share stories and strengthen bonds. Karen's organizational skills proved invaluable in coordinating these events, turning what could have been chaotic affairs into well-oiled operations that brought the community together. The Suspicious Potluck Festival evolved into an annual weekend-long celebration of community and reconciliation. Food trucks and local vendors joined the competition, and we added events like the Neighborhood Watch Fashion Show, where participants playfully modeled exaggerated surveillance gear. Karen always won Best Costume with her increasingly elaborate takes on her former vigilante persona. Officer Rodriguez's youth mentorship program produced its first college graduates, including his own daughter Maria, who followed in his footsteps by joining the police force. She specialized in community relations, using our neighborhood story as a model for building trust between law enforcement and residents. The program expanded to include internships with local businesses and government offices, creating pathways for young people to become active participants in community development. The petunias that had started it all became something of a local tourist attraction. Garden enthusiasts would visit to admire how the flowers had spread across property lines, creating a living testament to the power of letting go of artificial boundaries. Karen and I began hosting gardening workshops together, teaching others how to create collaborative landscapes that brought neighborhoods together instead of keeping them apart. David's community justice initiatives gained national attention, leading to speaking engagements where he shared our neighborhood story as an example of how restorative justice could work at the grassroots level. He always emphasized that the most powerful changes often start with small acts of forgiveness and understanding, like sharing a pot of beef bourguignon with someone who had wronged you. My mother's recipe, meanwhile, had taken on a life of its own. The neighborhood cookbook went through multiple printings, with each edition including new stories of how food had helped bridge divides in other communities. The scholarship fund it supported helped dozens of students pursue careers in community development and conflict resolution. Professor Richards incorporated our story into her curriculum, using it to illustrate how communities could transform surveillance into support and suspicion into solidarity. Her students would visit during the annual festival, conducting interviews and documenting how our neighborhood had evolved. Many of them went on to work in community organizing, carrying our lessons to other neighborhoods facing similar challenges. Sophia's career in digital media took an unexpected turn when she produced a documentary about neighborhood transformation, using our story as its centerpiece. The film, titled From Suspicion to Celebration, won several awards at independent film festivals and was used in training programs for community organizers and law enforcement agencies across the country. The original charcuterie board that I'd been holding when Karen first confronted me found a permanent home in our community center. Displayed alongside photos and news clippings from that night, it became a symbol of how life's most challenging moments can lead to unexpected blessings. We even had a plaque made, where a party became a beginning and a confrontation became a community. Emma and Jason's wedding in our backyard marked another milestone in our neighborhood's journey. The ceremony included a playful reenactment of the graduation party incident, with Karen good-naturedly playing herself. The highlight was the moment when Officer Rodriguez, serving as the officiant, asked if anyone objected to the union, and Karen stood up to declare she'd gathered evidence that the couple was guilty of excessive public displays of affection. The laughter that followed was genuine and warm, a far cry from the tense chuckles of that graduation night. It was a moment that captured how far we'd all come. Not just Karen and me, but our entire community. We had learned that the best way to overcome suspicion and fear was not through confrontation or withdrawal, but through engagement and understanding. This story is not just about a nosy neighbor getting humiliated when her accusations proved false. It's about how communities can grow stronger through conflict, how misconceptions can lead to meaningful connections, and how sometimes the most powerful response to distrust is to extend trust in return. Looking back now, a decade after that graduation night, our neighborhood has become a model for community transformation. The annual Suspicious Potluck Festival draws visitors from across the state, all eager to learn how a moment of conflict became a catalyst for positive change. Karen leads workshops on turning surveillance into service, sharing her journey from self-appointed neighborhood watchdog to respected community leader. The scholarship program, funded by our cookbook sales and festival proceeds, has helped over 50 students pursue degrees in community development, social work, and conflict resolution. Many of them return to intern in our neighborhood, learning firsthand how to build bridges between divided communities. Some have gone on to establish similar programs in their own cities, spreading the ripple effect of that memorable night even further. Emma and Jason's environmental law practice has grown into a nationally recognized firm, specializing in community-based solutions to local conflicts. They've helped dozens of neighborhoods transform their own challenges into opportunities for growth and connection. Their approach, which they call the Bourguignon method, much to my mother's delight, emphasizes the importance of finding common ground through shared experiences and understanding. Officer Rodriguez retired from the police force last year, but his youth mentorship program continues to thrive under Maria's leadership. The program has expanded to include conflict resolution training, community garden management, and emergency preparedness courses, all inspired by the various ways our neighborhood has grown and evolved since that graduation night. The petunias still bloom every spring, their colors more vibrant each year as they spread across our yards. Karen and I often sit among them, sharing tea and planning the next community event, marveling at how something beautiful can grow from the most unlikely circumstances. We've even started a seed-sharing program, encouraging other neighborhoods to plant their own unity gardens that ignore property lines in favor of creating shared beauty. The original evidence of our supposed gambling ring, the wrapped presents, the potluck dishes, the shared travel expenses, has become part of the storytelling at our community events. New residents are initiated into our neighborhood with a playful ceremony where they have to solve the case of the graduation party mystery, using clues hidden throughout the community center. Tom's Gardening Club has become a sanctuary for others like him, quiet souls who prefer to let their actions speak louder than words. The club's motto, "Growing Community from the Ground Up," reflects how something as simple as planting flowers together can help heal divisions and build lasting connections. David retired from his position as district attorney, but he continues to consult with communities looking to implement similar transformative justice programs. He often says that the most important lesson from our story is that true justice isn't about punishment or humiliation. It's about creating opportunities for understanding and growth. My mother's beef bourguignon recipe has been passed down to a new generation of community builders. Emma serves it at her firm's mediation sessions, and Karen makes it for new families moving into the neighborhood. The recipe card still bears the original note: "From your felonious neighbor, no gambling required." Professor Richards published a book about our neighborhood's transformation, titled From Surveillance to Celebration: How One Community Turned Conflict into Connection. The book is now required reading in several university courses on community development and conflict resolution. Karen wrote the foreword, reflecting on how her greatest mistake led to her most meaningful contribution to the community. Sophia's documentary continues to inspire other neighborhoods to examine their own dynamics and seek opportunities for transformation. She's currently working on a follow-up film, exploring how other communities have adapted our approach to address their own unique challenges. As I write this, I can hear the sounds of children playing in our connected backyards, their laughter carrying over the blooming petunias. Karen is teaching a group of teenagers the basics of emergency preparedness, her former suspicious energy now channeled into ensuring our community's safety and resilience. Tom is in his garden, showing a new neighbor how to properly prune roses, while my mother's beef bourguignon simmers in my kitchen, preparing for tonight's neighborhood council meeting. The graduation party, that Karen once suspected of being an illegal gambling operation, has become the founding myth of our community's renaissance. It reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with misunderstanding and conflict, that the path to community isn't always smooth, but it's the bumps and detours that often lead us to the most meaningful connections. Robert would have loved to see how it all turned out. He always believed in the power of food, laughter, and forgiveness to bring people together. As I watch our neighborhood continue to grow and evolve, I can almost hear him saying, "See, sometimes the best stories start with a little misunderstanding and a lot of love." And those petunias that Karen trampled that night, they didn't just survive, they thrived, much like our community itself. They remind us daily that beauty can grow in the most unexpected places, that strength often comes from adversity, and that the best way to transform a neighborhood is to lead with understanding, follow with forgiveness, and always keep a pot of something delicious simmering on the stove, ready to share with anyone who needs a reminder of what community really means.